Thanks for this opportunity. And it really is a topic I think that's on everybody's mind in Jackson and frankly throughout the West, right? And I do always enjoy these sessions. Thanks, Jonathan, for pulling them together. They are always thought-provoking. And I really do hope today's is about the conversation, but also action moving forward. And I would like to start this with framing what we've seen with visitation on the Bridger Teton over the past few years. And while last year certainly, as Cam talked about, had its unique set of challenges with COVID-19 and visitation and this big spike, we've been seeing this for several years on the forest. I think everyone remembers the eclipse of 2017, and certainly, as this photo shows, this was taken several years ago on a 4th of July on the Snake River. We've been noticing this increase in visitation, and while we do have some data, it's not as good as what we've been seeing from the Park Service because we don't have entrance gates, so we don't have a way to actually measure actual numbers of visits very easily. But that being said, it certainly has been increasing, and I do want to say in particular on the forest, on the national forest. It's not just about tourists, it's really about visitation. And we do have to consider our community residents, full and part-time as well. Visitors aren't just those on a short vacation. And as Jonathan talked about, this increasing Zoom, towns that we have, visitors or our residents are really part of the visitation fabric and really can be a powerful part of the solution as well. And so the question that we're thinking about on the forest is not necessarily about how much tourism is too much. It is about visitors, both residents and tourists, but it can't just be about numbers. And Cam was alluding to this. The question maybe isn't just necessarily how much use is too much, but how much change and how much impact is acceptable. What's sustainable socially, ecologically, and economically. I would say every acre on the 3.4 million acre Bridger Teton is not going to provide the same recreational experience. And there's room for diversity across that huge landscape. But we do have to define what's acceptable and what changes are acceptable and at what scale. I would say, for example, certainly in the community of Jackson, wildlife and wildlife conservation is a pretty strong core value of this community. And it's really important that we understand the impacts of recreation and wildlife. But I would ask, what wildlife? Are we talking about fairly common species, or are we talking about rare species like grizzly bears? What does the science tell us about these impacts? And at what scale does the activity take place? And does it really matter at that scale? Or things like, is it okay to displace bighorn sheep while I'm hiking, but is it not okay when I'm backcountry skiing? I would argue those impacts are pretty different to that species at different times a year, but even do our visitors and our recreationists even know that? So kind of in short, this stuff is really complicated. One of the things we're thinking about on the Bridger Teton is that there's 5 factors of visitor use that are really important to think about. The amount of use is one of them, but it's also the timing of use. When are they coming? What time of day? The location and distribution of use is really critical to think about. The types of uses and as well as the behavior of the users. And so the sheer numbers is really only one factor that we're thinking about. I would say, in a nutshell, clearly there are places for limits. And I don't want to say that limits aren't something we should be thinking about. But we really do need to focus on some of those other factors first. Good visitor use management, for example, being good stewards of the land, that can really help alleviate some of these concerns and really help visitors have realistic expectations when they come here. This is one of our dispersed camping sites, and here's 2 employees, Linda and Leslie, cleaning up some campfire rings that really aren't appropriate in that place. So some of that education. Again, we really need to define the problem before we can resolve it. Issues that we saw from last summer were not necessarily too much overuse across the forest, especially if you think about this large forest that's 3.4 million acres. But the issues really were around distribution of users. We saw much more excessive use around this corridor, around our boundary with Grand Teton National Park, but also in the Wind River Range. But I would say some of the other issues we saw were really unrealistic expectations from campers. People really did expect they could drive into this area at 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night and find a campsite, and they couldn't. Lots of lack of preparation. We had a lot of first-time visitors, first-time campers that really had no idea about things like sanitation, campfires, food storage. Lots of different kinds of uses. Certainly the camper vans are creating a whole new demographic of people getting out. Lots more side-by-sides, UTVs. Those are things that are a challenge. E-bikes. And then I just also did say, would like to say, we did see a fair amount of just disrespect and poor behavior from people, blatant disregard for regulations and even courtesy towards fellow campers. And so some things to ponder. Limits can work, they certainly can, but they may have unintended consequences. Certainly, like as Cam talked about, there's lots of places on the Bridger Teton that right now you can go and find solitude. But if we do start putting limits on some places, especially if we think about our wildernesses, some of our trails, camping, we have this unintended consequence where people might move to those other places. Is that what we want? I think we really need to think about that. Is more infrastructure the answer, or does that become not sustainable from a financial standpoint? I certainly am thinking about that when we think about Teton Pass planning, for example. So what do we know about last summer? I know everybody likes to hear some stats, and we have a few. One of the things we found is that in terms of campsite inventory, we certainly on the forest do not have the same level of infrastructure on the adjacent national parks. For example, on the north end of the Bridger Teton, we have about 225 developed sites and developed campgrounds, and then we have an additional 205 designated sites. That's contrasted with the over 1,000 camping sites that's in Grand Teton. And so there is not the same level of, there's much more demand for camping than we can provide. And also, again, I go back to, we're not serving people if we encourage them to come, but there's really no place to stay. And so that's one of the issues we saw. Our campsites, and just for reference, this is up at Toppings Meadow, adjacent to the park, very, very popular dispersed camping site, as you can see. But we were bursting at the seams, 99% occupancy rate on our campsites. Contrast that with 2019, when we were at about 59% for this season, a huge increase. We had some
Tricia, excuse me, I'm sorry. Your slides are not advancing, so we're still seeing the visitation with all the people on the river.
Oh, well, that's too bad. Thanks for saying that. I don't know what to do because I'm sharing it. Oh, well, I'll just keep talking. Sorry about that, everybody. I had some great slides, but they're not showing. So I'll just keep going, and maybe I'll turn off the slide.
You're possibly sharing the wrong screen.
Well,
we can see your slide deck. We just can't see the slides advancing. So I think you're sharing in presentation mode, but like we still see visitation. How much is too much?
Yeah, okay. All right, well, maybe I'll just share it this way. I'll kind of catch up where I was. There's one of my isolated slides. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna just stick with this. Sorry about that, everybody. My thought I had the technology down. But this is that photo of Toppings that kind of shows you one of the grand places we can go. But again, we were kind of bursting at the seam. And what I was going to say is that this site up at Toppings in Spread Creek area, where we had campground hosts last year, we saw 136% increase in camping compared with 2019. Obviously, that had something to do with some of the campsites not being available in the parks. But I also think it's been discovered. And honestly, free camping next to the parks, what a deal with a view like that. I'd also say that, wasn't just camping and crowds around those sites. It's the behavioral issues. We had a lot of unattended campfires last year, 280 reported in the north end of our forest. That's a lot. Luckily, we didn't have any major fires as a cause of that, but this year I'm really concerned about that. Human waste issues, lots of toilet paper, food storage violations, camping outside of designated sites, the list goes on. And I think that, this issue of people not behaving themselves around other campers, partying loud, and just being blatantly disrespectful really added to the issues that we had out there. I'd kind of move on also, we've talked about camping, but trail systems around Jackson. Definitely seeing, from what we can measure and our partners can measure, increased use on our major trails around Jackson, the cache game system, for example, 16% increase in overall use. On one day, that little trail to Ski Lake, very popular place up by Teton Pass, 3-mile trail, a 73% increase over 2019. And what that has brought is a lot of issues with parking, user conflicts, whether that's dog people, horse dog, bike people, bike dog, you name it. There's all those kinds of conflicts that go on our trails. And then just the evolving use we see. And then the last thing I'd mention is just employee burnout. We have some of the best stewards of public lands out there, I think, across all our agencies. And last year was really tough on employees to be dealing with this every day. And you put things like alcohol and all those other things that users are out there, and it just makes it really hard for our employees. I mean, we had a bunch of stories of, this kind of blows me away, but our law enforcement officers and our folks out there doing the patrolling, where we were in fire restrictions, and so no campfires, and people would say, and we'd give them a ticket for having a campfire, and they'd say, fine, I'm going to pay the ticket and I'm still going to have a campfire. And so just disregarding and then telling a law enforcement, well, what are you going to do about it? And the law enforcement officer saying, well, I'm going to escort you out of the wilderness because you can't have a campfire. So just this blatant disregard is really taxing on our employees. And it's really hard to walk away from this stuff when when you care about the land like our folks do. So what are we doing about this? I do think that, like has been mentioned by Cam, we are really focusing on a few key things, and we're going to continue this year. Responsible recreation. How do you help visitors understand what the expectations are of behavior? So we're really focused on that with a lot of partners, and I really want to give kudos to the Jackson Hole Travel Tourism Board, our Chamber of Commerce, Wyoming Department of Tourism Office, all our federal partners, Friends of the Bridge of Teton. We all have this same message about recreate responsibly, really, really key message. We have a few new RV parks for just RV campers up at Spread Creek and up at the snowmobile park up on Togety, just to help with that overflow capacity. One thing that's really working for us is this ambassador program. I know that the park has had that, but we've been expanding, especially with our partners, around camping ambassadors, bear ambassadors, trail ambassadors. And that ability for us to have people out there interacting with the public is proving to be one of those places where we can at least start helping to educate on appropriate behavior. Our partners have helped us put in a few new toilets, which will hopefully help with that toilet paper issue. And then I just would like to mention that we are working on the Recreation Wildlife Coexistence Project. Again, trying to get better science to help inform decisions. And really this whole issue of wildlife recreation, we need to understand what the real impacts are and really be thinking about those. So kind of in conclusion, I'll go back to what I'm calling Jonathan's Goldilocks question. Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it just right? And I really don't have an answer, but I would just say that the indicators that we have and that I've talked about, we are stretching the limits in some places around the 3 pillars of sustainability, social, environmental, and economic. And we're investing with partners and others to help manage those places. But at the same time, there's a lot of other places on the forest where we're not seeing it, but we need to be thinking about that. And we do need to be thinking about where potentially limits might be appropriate. But I will say I will worry about that. I do worry that we might exclude people from the outdoors. I mean, we saw a huge new diversity of public coming out enjoying public lands last year across the West. I love that. I love getting people outdoors. I love getting people who've never been outdoors, and we don't want to exclude them. And yet we still need to face some of these issues. And so I think that's part of the, the dilemma that we're all facing in this conversation. And then just lastly, I just really do want to thank the staff on the particularly our recreation staff and law enforcement on the Bridge of Teton. They are out there every day, and their hard work and commitment is unbelievable. And I really especially want to thank Linda Morigliano. I know some of you know her. I know she's on here today. Fabulous recreation program manager for the Jackson district. And I will tell you that I don't think there's anybody who has put more thought, time, and energy in this dilemma. And so I know she's here to help with the conversation as well. So thanks, Linda. And I really look forward to the dialogue.